My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 33 years old, a gunnery sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. For the past 11 years, I've lived in a rhythm of discipline, sacrifice, and deployments. My life was measured in sand, sweat, and steel. And in those years, there was one thing I believed was constant: my wife, Madeline. Madeline and I had been married for almost 9 years. We met when I was 24 and she was 22, back at the University of Missouri. She was studying accounting, sharp-minded and ambitious, with this laugh that made me forget every hard edge the Corps had carved onto me. I was an ROTC, already committed to the military, and she once told me she admired men who served. We built a life together in Kansas City, Missouri. While I deployed, she worked for a respected financial firm. While I faced sandstorms and insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan, she managed our home, our bills, and the stability I needed to keep my head straight in chaos. Or, at least, that's what I thought. When I returned from my most recent deployment, 7 months in Syria, I expected the same routine. Her smile, her embrace, the feeling that home was worth every risk. Instead, I walked into something different. The house smelled different the second I stepped inside. Not bad, just different. A floral scent, stronger than the lavender air freshener she'd always favored. The furniture was rearranged slightly. The photos on the mantel had been swapped around. Small things most people wouldn't notice, but when you spend years training to catch details that keep you alive, tripwires, disturbed sand, a natural silence, you notice everything. Madeline rushed to me at the door, sobbing into my chest like the world was collapsing. "I want a baby so badly," she choked out. Her words hit me like a sniper's bullet. Because for 9 years, Madeline had been clear. She did not want children. Every time I'd brought it up, she'd said the same thing. "I'm not ready for that responsibility. I don't want to be tied down like that." But now, here she was, clinging to me like her life depended on it, begging for something she had sworn she never wanted. I stroked her hair and whispered, "Of course, sweetheart, of course." But even as I held her, I felt it. Something wasn't right. Later, when she stepped back, I saw it. The curve, barely noticeable under her loose sweater, but I had memorized every inch of her body over 9 years. That wasn't just weight. That was the subtle swell of pregnancy. My chest tightened. By my count, she'd have to be at least 3 months along, and I hadn't been home in over 7 months. "Have you been eating well?" I asked casually. "Too well," she laughed nervously, her voice cracking. "Stress eating while you were gone. I missed you so much." I kissed her forehead. "I missed you too." But in my mind, the math was already working itself out. And the numbers didn't lie. 3 weeks before I returned home, while still deployed, I'd received an anonymous email. No sender name, no introduction, just a single line: "Your wife isn't eating alone." Attached was a photograph. It showed Madeline walking into a hotel downtown. She wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive navy suit. His hand brushed hers. He wore a wedding band. The timestamp? 2:14 p.m., a Tuesday. During her work hours. I stared at that image for hours in my tent, torn between denial and fury. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend it didn't exist. But the Marine in me, the one who survived firefights by never ignoring intel, knew better. So I kept it, and I started digging. With help from a fellow Marine who worked in private security back home, I hired a private investigator. Cost me nearly $1,000 for 3 weeks of surveillance, but it was worth every cent. The PI was thorough, ruthless even. He documented everything. Hotel visits twice a week, lunch meetings lasting hours, photographs of Madeline leaving a luxury apartment complex on Saturday mornings, wearing the same clothes she'd had on Friday nights. A receipt from a local pharmacy for a pregnancy test, dated 5 weeks before my return. The PI even pulled records from her workplace. The man in the suit was identified. Richard Hale, 42 years old, married with 3 kids, regional director at this financial firm where Madeline worked. He was her boss. Now, standing in my kitchen with her cooking dinner, like nothing had changed, I knew the truth. She was pregnant, the child wasn't mine, and she was planning to trick me into raising it. But I wasn't the same naive young man she married 9 years ago. War had changed me. I'd learned patience, strategy, and had it dismantle an enemy piece by piece. And Madeline had just declared herself the enemy. "Dinner'll be ready soon," she smiled nervously, avoiding my eyes. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her. "Madeline?" She turned, spoon in hand. "Yes?" "We need to talk." Her face went pale.
Madeline set the wooden spoon down on the counter, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her face had gone pale, lips trembling. "Talk about what?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms across my chest. "About your pregnancy." Her eyes widened instantly, panic flashing across her face. How did you know?" I tilted my head. "I notice things, always have, and you're not as good at hiding it as you think." She hesitated, then forced a shaky smile. "I was going to tell you tonight. I just found out yesterday morning. I thought it would be a surprise." Her words came fast, rehearsed, too rehearsed. "Yesterday morning?" I asked softly. "Yes, I took a test. It was positive. I was scared, but then when I knew you were coming home, I thought maybe it was a sign." I studied her for a long moment. "A sign?" "Yes," she whispered, "that we're meant to have a family, that maybe I was wrong before when I said I didn't want kids. I do now, Ethan, I really do." Her performance would have fooled most men, but I'd spent years interrogating enemy combatants, watching for micro-expressions, listening for the slip in their voices that betrayed the lie. Madeline was lying, badly. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. I slid it across the table. She glanced down. The color drained from her face. It was a picture of her leaving the women's health clinic downtown. Date stamped 3 weeks ago. She was already showing, wearing maternity clothes. Not yesterday morning, not even close. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the photo. "Ethan, please, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, but before you start spinning another story, let me show you something else." I pulled out a second photo. This one showed her walking into the Marriott Hotel, holding hands with Richard Hale. Her mouth fell open. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "Someone sent me an email while I was overseas, anonymous. Just one line, 'Your wife isn't eating alone.' And this photo." She shook her head violently. "Ethan, please, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She swallowed hard, wrapping her arms around herself. "Richard and we became friends while you were gone. He was having problems with his wife, and I was lonely. We started having lunch together, and then it grew into something more." Her voice cracked. "But it's over now. I ended it weeks ago. When I found out I was pregnant, I realized what I wanted was a family with you. That's the truth, Ethan. Please, believe me." I pulled out another sheet from the envelope. "Funny thing is," I said calmly, "because according to these medical records, you're 14 weeks pregnant. That puts conception sometime in late May." Her eyes widened. I deployed in April, so unless I got magical powers overseas, that baby isn't mine. Madeline stared at the records, her face gray. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. You ended it weeks ago? I asked interestingly. Because I have photos of you leaving Richard Hale's apartment building just 2 days ago. Same maternity top you wore to greet me at the door. Her shoulders sagged. She dropped into a chair, face buried in her hands. Okay, I didn't end it weeks ago. When then? Yesterday, she admitted, voice breaking. When I found out you were coming home, I hinted it yesterday. So you've been with him this entire time? Yes, she nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. And the baby? Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. It's his. The truth comes out. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring at the woman I'd once believed I could trust with my life. Does Richard know? I asked. Yes. What's his plan? Her eyes flickered. He said, he can't leave his wife and kids. He said, I was on my own. I chuckled bitterly. So your plan was to come home, bat your eyes, and convince me to raise another man's child. She sobbed. I didn't know what else to do. I panicked. I thought if you could just believe it was yours, maybe we could rebuild what we had. I shook my head. What we had died the moment you decided his hand felt better than mine, the moment you spread your legs for him while I was in a combat zone. Madeline flinched like I'd slapped her. Ethan, please, I love you. You don't love me, I said flatly. You loved what I provided. Stability, a roof over your head, my paycheck, my loyalty. And when I was gone, you traded it for cheap hotel rooms and lies. I pulled out one last document. Divorce papers. Filed 2 weeks ago, while I was still deployed. Her eyes went wide, her breath catching in her throat. You already filed? Yes, I said coldly. I wasn't coming home to reconcile. I was coming home to end this. I gave you one last chance tonight to see if you'd tell the truth, but all I got were more lies. Her tears fell harder. Ethan, please, you can't. I already did.
I stood up, sliding the rest of the evidence back into the envelope. You have until tomorrow to pack your things and leave. The house is mine. Bought it before we married. Never put your name on the deed. You can take your clothes, your personal belongings. That's it. Everything else stays. She stood too, knocking her chair back. This isn't fair. You can't just throw me out. I looked her dead in the eyes. You threw yourself out the day you decided to sleep with your boss while I was serving my country. Madeline's chest heaved, her face twisted with desperation. Richard will help me. Once he sees these peepers, once he realizes his wife is leaving him anyway, he'll want to be with me. I smirked. Funny thing, Richard Hale resigned from your company this morning. Cleaned out his office before anyone arrived. My investigator got photos of him loading a moving truck. He's headed back to Chicago to live with his brother. His phone's disconnected. He's gone, Madeline. He left you behind. Her eyes went wide with disbelief. She grabbed at the papers in my hand, scanning the evidence. The photo of Richard by the moving truck. The text from the PI, time-stamped just hours ago. No, she whispered. No, he wouldn't. He already did. She collapsed back into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching her. The woman who had sworn to be faithful in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. The woman who had chosen deceit over loyalty. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a cold, hard relief. The enemy had been exposed, and the war was over. For her. The next morning, Madeline was still in the house when I came down for coffee. Her suitcase sat by the door, but she hadn't left yet. Her eyes were red and swollen like she hadn't slept. Ethan, please, can we talk again? I poured my coffee without looking at her. We already did. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but we can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said flatly. The papers are filed. You'll be served officially within a week. My attorney will contact you about mediation. Tears welled up again. Mediation? You don't have to do this. I can change, Ethan. I'll prove it to you. I finally turned to face her. You can't unmake a baby that isn't mine. You can't erase the photos, the medical records, or the fact that you lied to my face last night. You don't get to rewrite history just because you don't like the ending. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once she had no argument. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the silence. Finish packing. I want you gone before noon. By the end of the week, Madeline had been served. The look on her face when the process server handed her the envelope was almost satisfying enough to erase 2 years of betrayal. Almost. I sat across from my attorney, Carolyn Mercer, in her downtown office. She was sharp, efficient, and ruthless. Exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted when your spouse had betrayed you. Given the evidence you've provided, Carolyn said, flipping through the thick file of photos, medical records, and text transcripts, this should be relatively clean. The house is in your name alone, your accounts were separated before the marriage, and there's no joint debt. She'll try to claim spousal support, but her affair will torpedo that. What about the baby? I asked. Carolyn adjusted her glasses. Paternity test will prove it isn't yours. Once that's on record, you'll have no financial responsibility. The court won't saddle you with child support for another man's kid. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. Relief washed over me like cool water. Good. That's all I need. Carolyn gave a thin smile. Something tells me you want more than just freedom. You want her to hurt. I met her gaze. She deserves to feel everything she put me through. 2 months later, we sat across from each other in a small courtroom. Madeline wore a conservative dress, her hair tied back, trying to look like the grieving, repentant wife, but her eyes betrayed her, darting, frantic, filled with desperation. The judge reviewed the documents, expression unreadable. Mrs. Cross, you are petitioning for spousal support? Yes, Your Honor, Madeline said, her voice trembling but rehearsed. I've relied on Ethan for financial stability, and I'm carrying his child. Objection, Carolyn cut in sharply. Paternity has already been tested and disproven. The child is not Mr. Cross's. The judge raised his eyebrow, flipping through the papers. Yes, I see the results here. Mrs. Cross, why did you claim otherwise? Madeline stammered, face reddening. I thought... The judge's voice hardened. The court does not tolerate false statements. Given the evidence of adultery and the paternity results, spousal support is denied. Her jaw dropped. Denied? Yes, the judge said firmly. Furthermore, since the marital home was purchased before the marriage and remains solely in Mr. Cross's name, it is not subject to division. Madeline's face crumpled. She looked at me, desperation burning in her eyes. I stared back with the same cold detachment I had worn the night she confessed. The gavel came down, just like that. It was over. Madeline walked out of the courtroom like a ghost, shoulders slumped, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Richard Hale had vanished without a trace. His resignation had killed her career too. Without his protection, she'd been quietly pushed out of the company. Now she had no job, no home, no husband, no future. Just a child that tied her forever to a man who'd abandoned her. I should have felt something. Pity, maybe. Satisfaction. But all I felt was freedom. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest was gone. 3 weeks later, I saw her one last time. She showed up at the coffee shop where I was meeting an old Marine buddy. Her belly was showing now, her face drawn and tired. She approached my table, clutching her purse. "Ethan," she whispered, "please, just 5 minutes." I glanced at my buddy, who nodded and stood to give us space. Madeline sat down, eyes glistening. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I lost everything, and I know it's my fault. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to hear me say it. I studied her for a long moment. The woman who once shared my bed, my dreams, my future.
Now just a stranger with a swollen belly and empty eyes. "You made your choices," I said quietly, "and I made mine. That's all there is." Her lips trembled. "So that's it? After everything, I'm just nothing to you?" I stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "You're not nothing. You're a lesson." And with that, I walked away. I never saw her again. The silence after the storm is always the strangest part. For months, my life had been consumed by confrontation, gathering evidence, confronting lies, battling in court. Every day had a target. Every night a restless sleep filled with strategies and imagined counterattacks. And then, suddenly, it was done. Madeline was gone. The divorce finalized. The house was mine again, stripped of her perfume, her photographs, her voice echoing in the halls. For the first time in years, I was alone. But instead of loneliness, I felt something else. Peace. The first morning after the divorce, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds. No tension, no dread about what new lie I'd have to face. Just quiet. I walked through the house barefoot, sipping coffee. The walls looked different now. They weren't filled with betrayal. They were filled with potential. I started small, repainting the living room, tearing down the floral curtains she'd picked out, throwing away the wedding china that had never been used. Each change was a reclamation, a reminder that this was my space again. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about erasing the version of myself who had tolerated her. Word traveled fast among the Marines. A few days after the final court date, I got a call from Marcus Kane, a guy I'd served with in Fallujah. "Brother," he said, his voice booming through the phone, "heard you went through hell. You free tonight? We're grabbing beers." That night I walked into O'Malley's, the dive bar where half the veterans in town seemed to gather. Marcus was there, grinning like always, along with half a dozen other faces I hadn't seen in years. "Look what the desert dragged in," Marcus roared, slapping me on the back. For the first time in months, I laughed. Really laughed. We swapped stories, traded insults, raised our glasses to the ones we'd lost. They didn't look at me like I was broken or betrayed. They looked at me like Ethan Cross, Marine, brother, survivor. And in their eyes, I remembered who the hell I was. It wasn't enough just to survive. I needed something to fight for. I started volunteering at the local veteran center. At first, it was just a few hours a week, helping younger vets navigate the maze of paperwork, listening to stories from guys who felt forgotten. But soon it became more. I organized fundraisers, helped start a job placement program, even coached a group of young Marines struggling with PTSD. Every time I walked into that center, I felt the weight on my chest lift a little more. Madeline had taken my trust, my marriage, and nearly my future. But she hadn't taken my purpose. That was mine to rebuild. 6 months later, I met Claire Donovan. She wasn't dramatic, wasn't manipulative, wasn't playing games. She was a nurse at the VA hospital, kind but tough, with a laugh that cut through any darkness. We met while I was helping a buddy with his appointments. She teased me for looking lost in the waiting room, and I teased her back. 1 coffee turned into 3, 3 turned into dinners, dinners turned into late-night walks. Claire never asked for more than I could give. She never pushed. She just listened. She just understood. And slowly I realized something terrifying. I wanted to trust again. One night, months later, I heard a rumor through the grapevine. Madeline had tried to move in with a friend, but the friendship soured.
She'd bounce between couches, struggling to hold down a job. Richard Hale had completely disappeared. His name never came up again. Eventually, I heard she'd left town altogether. Belly swollen, reputation ruined. That should have been my burden. That child should have been shackled to me by lies and paperwork. But instead, it was hers alone. I felt no triumph, no anger, just distance. She was a ghost, and ghosts had no power over me anymore. 2 years later, I stood in the backyard of the same house Madeline once tried to claim. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. Beside me, Claire held my hand, her head resting on my shoulder. Laughter rang out from inside, where my Marine brothers swapped stories with the young vets I now mentored. The grill smoked, the beer flowed, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because of revenge, not because of victory, but because I had built something stronger out of the ashes. Madeline's betrayal was the end of one life. But it was also the beginning of another. And this time, it was mine alone.
Betrayal never comes without a cost. Madeline had paid hers quickly. The collapse of her marriage, her home, her reputation. But Richard Hale's reckoning came slower, more drawn out, more humiliating. And it was just as satisfying. I never laid a hand on Richard. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. Word spread through the company like wildfire. The respected vice president who had preached about professional ethics was caught in an affair with a married subordinate. The board of directors panicked. Clients whispered. Morale tanked. By the time I returned home from deployment, Richard had already handed in his resignation. The company couldn't risk the scandal, not with photos, medical records, and hotel receipts floating around in the right inboxes. Nobody ever proved it was me who supplied those documents. But let's just say the evidence didn't leak by accident. Richard's wife, Eleanor, was no fool. She'd suspected for months. When the truth finally landed in her lap, courtesy of a concerned source, she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply packed her bags, took the kids, and walked out. Divorce proceedings gutted him. Child support, alimony, half his assets gone. The once proud executive found himself living in a rented apartment, his savings drained, his career in ruins. And the irony? The woman he'd risked it all for, Madeline, was left behind, pregnant and alone. He didn't so much as return her calls. In the corporate world, reputations travel faster than resumes. Richard's name became poison. No Fortune 500 company would touch him. Smaller firms didn't want the liability. Within a year, he was freelancing consulting gigs just to keep the lights on. The man who once commanded boardrooms now begged for contracts from companies he used to sneer at. And every time I heard his name mentioned in passing, it was never with respect, only pity. About 18 months after the divorce, I saw him again. He was at a gas station just outside of town. I was filling up my truck when a beat-up sedan pulled into the next pump. Out stepped Richard Hale. The man was unrecognizable. His tailored suits had been replaced by a wrinkled button-down. His hair was thinner, his face pale, his belly hanging over his belt. He froze when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Finally, he forced a weak smile. "Ethan, long time." I looked him up and down. "Richard?" He swallowed, glancing away. "Listen, about everything that happened, I just want you to know I regret it. All of it. I lost my wife. My kids barely speak to me. My career's finished, and Madeline, well, you know how that turned out." I said nothing, just watched him squirm. He cleared his throat. "I guess what I'm saying is, you won. You got the last laugh." I shook my head slowly. "This wasn't about winning, Richard. It was about the truth. You destroyed yourself. All I did was hand you the mirror." His shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I remembered. Defeated. For the first time, I realized he wasn't my enemy anymore. He was just another casualty. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror. Richard stood at the pump, head bowed, shoulders hunched. A man who had once thought he was untouchable, now brought to his knees by his own choices. And in that moment, I felt no rage, no triumph. Just closure. The war was over, and Richard Hale was nothing more than another ghost in the rearview mirror. Time doesn't erase betrayal, but it does give you perspective. It had been nearly 2 years since my marriage to Madeline collapsed, and the storm had finally settled into something resembling peace. I lived in a modest but comfortable home just outside of Kansas City. Not the house I'd shared with her. Not the battlefield of memories and lies. No, this was my own. The walls didn't whisper betrayal. The rooms weren't haunted by arguments. Every corner, every piece of furniture was chosen with care. Part of a life I was building on my own terms. I'd left the Marines after my last deployment. 10 years of service, 2 wars, countless sleepless nights. I'd done my part, paid my dues, and it was time to hang up the uniform. Using my benefits, I enrolled in a criminal justice program. I'd always been good at noticing details, at putting puzzles together. Maybe it was time to put those skills to work protecting people closer to home. And in the process, I met someone new. Her name was Emily, a nurse at the VA hospital, with steady hands and eyes that carried both kindness and strength. She didn't ask me to be anyone but myself. She didn't shrink from my scars, visible or invisible. She saw the man, not just the Marine. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Madeline, on the other hand, was a ghost I couldn't quite ignore. Word trickled back to me through old mutual friends, neighbors, even the occasional social media post. After the divorce, she'd moved back in with her parents in Nebraska. The once confident corporate woman was now a single mother, raising a child conceived in deception, struggling to make ends meet in a small-town insurance office. The child, Richard's child, was innocent. None of this was their fault.
But Madeline? She was living the consequences of every choice she'd made. Every lie. Every night in a hotel room while I fought for my life overseas. Every plan she made to trick me into raising another man's baby. I sometimes wondered if she ever thought about me. About the life we could have had if she'd just been honest. If she'd waited. If she'd respected the vows we'd made. But the truth is, wondering doesn't change anything. She'd made her bed. Now she was lying in it. Richard's story wasn't much brighter. After resigning in disgrace, he'd tried to rebuild in Chicago. But Eleanor had gutted him in divorce court, and the industry had blacklisted him. He lived in a small apartment, working odd consulting jobs, sending most of his paycheck to his ex-wife and daughters. The man who once strutted through offices in $1,000 suits now struggled to pay for parking. I never saw him again after that gas station encounter. But in my mind, that broken, hollow man standing with a gas pump in hand was the perfect epilogue to his story. Not vengeance, not violence, just justice. One crisp autumn evening, Emily and I sat on the back porch of my new home.
The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the sky painted in pinks and oranges. She leaned against me, her hand resting gently on mine. "You ever think about her?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not the way you think. I don't miss her. I just remember what she did, what it cost me, what it taught me." Emily nodded. "And what did it teach you?" I thought for a moment, then said, "That loyalty isn't proven in promises. It's proven in actions. That some people see absence as an opportunity instead of a sacrifice. And that love without respect isn't love at all." She smiled softly. "And now?" "Now," I said, squeezing her hand, "I'm finally free." Betrayal cuts deep. It leaves scars you carry long after the dust settles. But scars aren't weaknesses. They're proof that you survived. Madeline lost everything because she thought she could deceive me. Richard lost everything because he thought he was untouchable. And me? I lost marriage, but I gained clarity, strength, a second chance at a life built on honesty and trust. The war I fought overseas taught me how to survive on the battlefield. The war I fought at home taught me how to survive betrayal. And in the end, I didn't just survive. I won. Not because I destroyed them, but because I refused to let them destroy me. Years later, when I tell this story, people always ask the same question. If you could go back, would you do anything differently? And I always answer the same way. No. Because sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that save you. Then I raise a glass. To loyalty, to resilience, to the strength to walk away, and to never letting betrayal define you.